Project Bicep, which we're really looking at improving our infrastructure as code experience on Azure. We're super lucky to have Brendan Burns here today. Brendan is our corporate vice president for the Azure control plane as well as Kubernetes on Azure. And so, we thought we'll invite him to give you a little bit about the why did we go down this path and what are some of the key benefits you get of using the platform native capabilities. Today we're going to spend some time talking about the goals of Bicep. We're going to spend some time giving you guys a demo of it. And we'll also do an open mic at the end where you can come off mute and ask questions. So as many of you know, my name is Satya. I lead the program management team for the Azure deployments area. The folks that you see on the screen are all a part of our team, and we're answering on chat. If you do have a question in the chat window, I request you to use the hashtag question. This makes it easy for the moderators to parse through what are the questions versus what are comments and feedback as well. So please use hashtag question, and then you can put your question and we'll answer it. If we don't get to it, we'll answer it at the end as well. So with that said, I think Brendan's on the call. Brendan?
Hey there. I think I wanted to talk about our motivations for starting Bicep, and it really came down to improving the existing experience for people who are using ARM templates, as well as to provide an awesome first experience for people who are doing infrastructure as code on Azure. So we think that the current approach of trying to encode everything in JSON is just not well suited for the kinds of work that people were doing, and extending it further and adding more capabilities, but still being limited by the JSON language was just not going to get us to the right place where we needed to be for people. And so we thought that we could create something new that would, but influenced by other things that would really accelerate how people could use Azure and the sort of eliminate some of the common pain points that people brought up to us. Okay. So next slide. All right, I think it's important when you're doing any of these projects, and actually really honestly, I was just talking about this in terms of running a team. It's important to both know what you want to accomplish and what you're trying to do, as well as what you're not trying to do, right? And so as we started thinking about the development of Bicep, we sort of had these goals in mind. To reduce the number one goal really was to reduce the current pain that people felt, right? We have a large number of people deploying things out to ARM templates today, and they have existing pain, right? And so no harm and actually made things better. So sorry, I'm moving through rooms in our COVID work from home environment as the kids are about to start school. We also wanted to help with adoption and make sure that it was an easy thing as you started thinking about infrastructure as code. It was an easy thing to start adopting it, and that's another important piece of the puzzle. I think it's in terms of the non-goals, one of the most important things to say is we really were not trying to, come in and revolutionize the infrastructure as code space, right? There's a ton of really great solutions out there. We work hard to make sure that those solutions work awesome on Azure, and we're going to continue to do that, right? So Bicep doesn't mean we're not investing in Terraform, doesn't mean that we're not interested in people like Pulumi who are sort of breaking new ground. Or like the Farmer project. There's a whole bunch of different projects for interacting with Azure, and fundamentally we sort of believe that the space of config and IAC is kind of like programming languages. There's going to be a lot of different solutions, and we want to make sure they all are awesome when you use them with Azure. And then I think finally also we didn't embark on this because we thought that designing a language would be cool, although I think we've enjoyed the process of designing a language, and it's been a fun journey. But we didn't sort of seek out to do new things. We really wanted to focus on our customers and the existing customer base and make it better. So, all right, next slide. All right, so this gives you a perspective about new and not tie it to any of the existing investments either on our side or on the customer side, right? And so we didn't want to do that, right? There's a ton of ARM templates out there that people have built over, a very long time at this point, and telling all those people that, hey, it's great, this new thing, but you're gonna have to rewrite everything, was just a non-starter, right? So we had to create an environment where you could take your existing investments and move forward, and those investments aren't just about the templates you've written, but they're also about the things you've learned, right? And so we wanted Bicep to be something that you could take your knowledge of existing ARM templates and move it forward. And so that's what led to this sort of idea of Bicep as a transpiler, really, and in some ways inspired by the things that TypeScript has done to make JavaScript better through transpilation. We really focused on Bicep as a transpiler because it means that it's easy to interop with existing ARM templates, and it also means that anything that we do on the server side naturally accrues to people who want to use traditional ARM templates, right? So if you don't want to learn this fancy new thing, or you're going to get there eventually, but you want access to new features, they're going to be in JSON templates too. In many cases, and those server-side features will be available to people everywhere. So we think that discipline is really important, and this gives you a sense of how we're accomplishing that. It's also really important to say that we really went into this as an open project, right? And this is I've talked to some people for whom this is their first open project. And actually, it's been really exciting to see people start to get interested, to see people get involved in not just sort of consuming this and telling us what they like and don't like, but actually contributing and doing this in a collaborative way, right? So we're fully out on GitHub. We came out with an 0.1 release. It's not like we're going to go from 0.1 to 1.0. There's going to be a lot of iteration and a lot of word community, and we're really excited about that. It's been fantastic. So, all right, go ahead, next slide. And that leads to this part, which is because we plan on all this iteration, we really, really, really want to discourage people from taking this and then immediately jumping into production. There's two reasons for this, obviously. One is, that we're going to break things. I guarantee it, right? So we don't want you to take a dependency on something that we're iterating forward, because I kind of guarantee that we will break you at the most awkward moment possible, right? So everything will work in the night before the demo, before your boss or your most important client, and then we will literally break something during the night. And in the middle of the demo, your demo won't work. Obviously we don't do it on purpose, but surveys or past experience shows that when things break, they always break at the worst possible time. So please don't take a dependency. We'll get there. We're going to get to a place where we'll say, yes, absolutely, take a dependency on us. We're production ready. But selfishly also, people taking dependencies on us now actually slows down the team, slows down the community, slows down our ability to iterate, because if we're busy sort of fixing bugs that are out in production and emergencies, we're not going to have the time and energy to focus on moving the language forward, moving the experience forward. So please give us the time and space, but please do also engage, because we want you to play around with it. We want you to give it a try, see what works, see what doesn't, but just realize that this is a rapidly moving surface area, and it's going to be until 0.7, 0.8 that it's going to stabilize to a point where we will where we can give you some guarantees about not breaking you. All right. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Alex, I think, and he's going to give you a demo. So thanks.
Thanks, Brendan.
Alex, while you're starting up, I just want to make an announcement that I think the Teams link is full. I think it's hit its 500 people capacity. So if you have colleagues that are trying to join, just tell them we'll share the recording, and we'll also try to do another one with maybe a different platform.
There is, Satya, for the future, there is some Teams Live-esque thing where you can broadcast out too.
Yeah, I should have
That's
thought about that. I didn't realize we'll hit the 500 limit.
That's okay. I like this happened actually like at back to school for my kids. Like they all the parents came into back to school night and like crashed out their team. So it happened.
Can folks see my screen?
Yes.
Cool. So I am on just the landing page of the Bicep repo. This is just to, obviously we have a repo that Brendan out. Importantly, it has a getting started section, and on files. It's using today. It is technically optional, though it's highly encouraged, also cross-platform. All of these work about the functions that have the resource word inside of it. So very, very basic IntelliSense. You'll see us add more over time. So I just defines what properties are available for a particular resource declaration. So we're going to create a trustee storage account. So it's going to be Microsoft.storage/storage accounts. And then the version is going to be 2019 0601. If you're familiar and use the ARM tools extension today, we do have IntelliSense for the resource types and API versions. We'll bring that same IntelliSense to Bicep. We just don't have it yet. And then the last tab stop is going to be for the name. can add a link to the spec for it if people want to take a look at it. But for basic double quotes on property names, just the type string in general gets a lot. Identifiers. So this identifier STG slash storage accounts. And then you get to use a much simpler statement with the symbolic name. I can get other properties from the symbolic name. While we've changed the syntax and made it cleaner and it has its own file extension, we haven't changed anything about the it's not the same as really embarking on a net new language in its entirety. Okay, so the second tutorial is about deploying a bicep file, and I'm not going to deploy this. I'll just run through this. And then deploying it with the same commandlets or CLI or SDK or portal that you're ID. So I do. You'll notice that we turn the string interpolation in Bicep into the format function in the ARM template. We do this because it's a little bit easier for us to handle in the ARM template layer. We could have done concat, but we chose format. Functionally, instead of /default/logs. So this is the name of my container. I could have done storage account name here, but I wanted to do an explicit reference to the symbolic name, to the resource identifier. When Bicep sees that you've made a reference to another resource's identifier, it knows that there's a dependency there, and it can automatically calculate that depends on and put it in the JSON on your behalf. So normally I would need a depends on statement right here. I would need to do something to this effect. But because I have an explicit reference, I no longer need to have that there. And we will, in the tooling, show you warnings when you have a redundant depends on statement, so you can start to learn when and when not you need that depends on statement. So here's our storage account. We had it here before, and here's our container that's new. And then we have an explicit depends on declared here. I didn't need to worry about it. I don't need to worry about the structure of it. It just gets added automatically because Bicep knows exactly what to do. So this is really, really useful when you're constructing and wiring up resources. In 99% of cases, you should be able to use the reference to the symbolic name, and then you shouldn't need to worry about depends on, and that's another few lines that you don't need to worry about or need to learn about. So that's another pretty helpful one. The last tutorial is on converting any ARM template into a Bicep file. There is an asterisk here because we don't support everything that ARM template supports today in this 0.1. But over time, as we work towards really 0.3 is the big milestone for us. We want to get to one-to-one parity with ARM templates. But in the meantime, if it doesn't use the copy property, if it doesn't use the condition property on resources, if you're deploying all within the same scope, you can convert your Bicep file. And so this walks through what it looks like in ARM templates and what you need to do to convert that into Bicep. It gets pretty straightforward once you kind of understand the structure of how Bicep is put together, but this can be a useful reference until we have a decompiler to make this a little bit easier for you. So that is everything that is working today. If you want to get a sense of what's happening in the future, you can go into the docs directory and the spec directory. And you can see we have things here that don't exist yet in Bicep. So we have a loops spec, we have a module spec, we have a resource scope spec. So this is a great thing to take a look at if you want to get a sense of what our roadmap looks like in terms of the actual syntax. We still are definitely taking feedback on some of these things. There's an open issue for loops where there's a discussion going. So we highly encourage you to take a look at this. Obviously, we have our issues tab. It's already pretty lively, which is just awesome. And then we have our milestones within here, so you can get a sense of our roadmap. So we have closest due date. We have 0.2, 0.3, and 0.4 here. We have a committed backlog, which is things that we think we can get to in the next 6 to 12 months. And then we have a not as fast as you would like bucket, which basically means it's a interesting scenario. It's a good feature. We want to fix it, but we likely don't have the resourcing to schedule it. So it's a great one to do a PR for because we're not likely to get to it ourselves. And then the last thing on the issues, we're going to keep this pinned issue here for things that need feedback. So this is just a query that will take you to all the issues that have the needs feedback label. So that can be another great one to help participate and get your feedback on where you want the Bicep language to go. Okay, that's everything I had. So we can spend the rest of the time on questions.
Alex, do you have the slides, or actually I can present if it makes it easier.
Sure.
Brendan, do you want to maybe take a moment and just kind of talk through the options we explored, or?
Brendan, you're on mute if you're there.
Sorry.
I'm talking.
My phone was on the charger and locked, and so unplug, fingerprint scanner, find the mute button, wait for Teams to wake up. You know how it is. So yeah, I mean, I think that two things are important when we think about the options explored. One is the explicit non-goal that we talked about at the beginning around not trying to take over the world, right? So this isn't to say that these constituencies or these interests aren't interesting or important. They are all interesting and important, but we wanted to focus on the ARM template subsegment of the world. So, and as I said earlier, when we thought about improving JSON, we think there's just limitations of JSON. When we looked at the programming languages stuff, we think it's cool. I personally think it's really cool. I've experimented with this a bunch, and the Pulumi folks are in Seattle. I've hung out with them a bunch, but it just didn't hit our customer use case, basically. And also, they're doing a great job iterating on that idea, and we didn't feel the need to sort of jump into their swimming pool. We also looked at a PowerShell-based DSL. There's a great community around PowerShell, and they have a very sort of opinionated syntax that a lot of people are familiar with. But they also have a sort of limited silo. And the truth of the matter is that Azure is 55% Linux and growing, and we want to we want to make sure we cater to everybody who's using Azure, not just sort of people who are familiar with PowerShell. And that led us to Bicep, where we realized that there's some disadvantages to creating a new language, but ultimately the advantages of creating a new language that was related to existing languages outweighed the benefits of using any existing approach. So, but I'm happy to take more questions and discussion on that.
Thank you, Brendan. I think one thing we can do is there's a bunch of people that raise their hand, so I'm going to call their name. If you can come off mute and then ask your question, and we can field it from there. So, Dawal, do you want to start?
Yep. My question, I had two questions. One was answered during the presentation itself, was around conditions and the loops, because we use conditions very well. It's pretty common place to use conditions during ARM templates creation. So most of the ARM templates that I have developed are conditional, and they also have copy and other kinds of loops in it. So, but I think that's on the roadmap. The other question was integration with DevOps, because in most of deployments that we've done in the recent past, we have built and release cycles, and we use Pester because we generally use PowerShell to do the deployments. So Pester for testing. So what is the roadmap, and when do you think all these things are going to come together?
Yeah, good question. So the short answer is, well, there's one community GitHub action actually for compiling and deploying a Bicep file, but that's not something that we maintain today. So the short answer today is you're kind of on your own to either get the Bicep binary, the CLI, into your pipeline agent so that it can compile the Bicep file for you, or you can compile it as part of your commit process. So the ARM template JSON file is there, and it can be deployed through the standard means of deploying through any pipeline. As we go forward and get closer to 0.3, we want the Bicep CLI to be more closely integrated into, at least to start out, the deployment CLI tooling. So AZ CLI has deployment commandlets and PowerShell has deployment commandlets. What we want to be able to provide is to allow you to point to a file, a .bicep file, instead of a .json file for your templates, and we'll compile it on your behalf in advance of sending it to ARM. Ultimately, what we send to ARM remains an ARM template, but you don't necessarily need to have or look at the JSON in order to do the deployment. You always will be able to if you want to compile and look at it locally, but it won't be required going forward.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Satya.
No problem. Eddie? Oh, sorry, Scott. You were next. My bad. Scott Metzel. If you could come off
Sure,
mute.
thank you. Yeah, my question was just kind of around the structure of the file, just more of organization. It appears like, I guess, does it actually matter where, I guess, some of these objects exist within the file? Like I know that, with an ARM template, it doesn't really matter if I put my resources down below or outputs, above or whatever. But it seems like because of the abstraction, there's at least a possibility that I could become pretty disorganized, when I'm putting together one of these Bicep files, if that makes sense. So I guess my question is, does it matter, the order in which these objects appear in the file, or is it just kind of a wide open field?
Yeah, great question. It no longer matters the order. Basically all the parameters no longer need to be declared together, or the variables need to be declared together, or the resources or the outputs. You can mix things together, and it is a double-edged sword, as you note, Scott.
Yeah.
It'll likely be best practice to keep all your parameters together at the top. Potentially, you may even want to have your outputs right underneath it. So the first thing that users see is actually basically the contract of the Bicep file, especially as we introduce modules. That's going to become more important. But that'll ultimately be a user preference. We can have, linting tools that encourage that and auto formatters that encourage that, but you do have kind of freedom of expression on those keywords.
Got it. So it just becomes kind of a thing of discipline, best practice, and whatever works for the problem, the customer, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah. The nice, there's a couple nice things that it introduces by allowing that to be more freeform. One of the better ones is that I can now copy and paste an entire block of Bicep code and put it at the bottom of the file, and it'll work. I may want to reorganize things afterwards, but that's one that I really had to kind of do some surgery to take someone else's ARM code and put it into my template. And that's a lot easier now.
Does that also apply to variables? So like if I declare a variable, above, so it's not read, I guess, or compiled linearly. Sorry, not enough coffee. So like if I declare a variable up top and maybe declare a variable even above that, but make reference to, the variable down below, does that still compile? Does that still, is that still valid at that point?
Yeah, it's still valid. It'll still work. Please don't put your variables as the last line of your file if you want to use them somewhere else. But yeah, that will work. And what I'm finding myself doing is I'm putting my parameters up top. Most of the time I put my outputs at the bottom, but not always. And then I mix variables and put them closer to where they are consumed. And that tends to work best for me, but ultimately it's personal preference.
Yeah, I can kind of imagine myself just maintaining a one-to-one, like however I'm organizing my Bicep file, I'm going to probably organize my ARM templates the same way or vice versa, just in terms of where the objects are appearing, just for sanity's sake. But yeah, anyway, thank you.
Yeah.
Eddie Frederick.
Thank you all. Yeah, so maybe more of an ARM question than a Bicep question, but will there at any point on the roadmap be the ability to incorporate in either Azure CLI or PowerShell scripts that are not necessarily within a nested template? And as I understand the concept of transpiling, I know that's a current limitation of ARM, where those have to be incorporated into nested templates, if you will. So so maybe that's more of an ARM question on if there's roadmap to allow the ability to execute Azure CLI or Azure PowerShell scripts associated with that. And the second part of my question, and I'll go back on mute, as to it's really kind of independent, but is there so I understand on GitHub I'm looking at all the outstanding issues and actions and conversations. Is there going to be will you guys publish a formal roadmap that will show where you are as far as milestones and deliverables?
Yeah, so I will answer the second question first, but stay off mute because I have some follow-up questions. One is on the Issues tab, there's a Milestones button that breaks things down into our schedule, and there are due dates there, and it's a pretty good approximation of the issues we expect to close before that 0.2 or 0.3 releases. And then I think we're also going to create an pinned issue on the issues page as like an announcements feed, basically, and you can subscribe to the issue and just get updates on that if you want. So we'll have a few different channels to get updates, and we'll make it known on Twitter and on Yammer, and we'll probably keep doing these community calls for every kind of major milestone. So we'll do our best to keep you updated there.
Thank you for that.
The first question is the ask to run PowerShell or CLI when compiling from Bicep to the ARM template, or is it to run it in the middle of the deployment while other things are happening?
Yeah, it's really it's really at deployment time for the ARM template. Being able to, often we run into cases where I'm either running a pre or post deployment set of scripts or tasks, and it's things that either we don't know how to do well in ARM, or it's things that fall outside of the scope that what ARM can do for us. So being able to embed the ability to run an Azure CLI set of scripts or Azure PowerShell scripts would be really nice at runtime for ARM at deployment time.
Got it. So if you haven't already checked it out, I just put a link in the chat for this capability we have called deployment scripts, and it allows you to run PowerShell or CLI in the middle of your deployment. So it can be a pre-action, it can be a during action, or it can be a post-action. So you may want to check that out. I think that's going to solve your problem, but if it doesn't, let us know.
It's great. Thank you.
And it's always good for us to get feedback on the cases where you guys are using that, because it could be a limitation in the platform. It could be we haven't documented something well enough. So if you're dropping to that, we want to make sure that we're making it as easy as possible to do those things that you feel the need to drop to that for. So be sure to give us feedback if it seems like it's a scenario like that.
Yeah. Mikhail, if you could come off mute and ask a question.
Yes. So my question is, first of all, a very nice presentation and lovely to see all this great stuff. But my question is a little bit about organization of like you only presented one file, but at least for me, one pain for using ARM templates is they get very, very long, very, very fast. And to have a way to organize your ARM template, or in this case Bicep template, in more than just one file, and then have it sort of pre-merged before the build. Yep. Is that something you're looking into?
Yeah, so I'll drop a link to the modules spec. That's one way that we're making that easier. So basically, you'll be able to break things down locally within your file structure and reference them as modules, and you provide parameters to them, and you can get outputs from them. Similar conceptually to linked templates, but a lot easier to work with. You don't need to stage files or anything like that. The other one that is open for discussion, and there is an issue for it, a lot of people want to split their files similar to how HCL does it or how Go does it. Basically, all the files that are co-located in a directory just get squashed together, and to the binary, it looks like one file. So that's one that we're evaluating. I think we're of two minds on that one. There's definitely some pros and cons, but if we get enough interest, that's something that we can do as well.
Right, that was my exact question. Thank you.
Cool.
Excellent. Next one is Spencer. If you could come off mute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, thanks a lot. Really great presentation. This is exciting stuff. I'm comparing this as we go throughout the presentation to Terraform, which is a tool that I have a lot of experience with using. And I can see some obvious similarities in the syntax and the way this is leveraged. It seems like one of the big fundamental differences, the way that Terraform manages infrastructure versus ARM templates and by extension Bicep, is that ARM templates are stateless, right? You deploy them, and they either are additive or just wipe the slate clean and create it there. One of the big advantages that Terraform leverages of state is a cross-reference of deployments. So if you have different repositories or just different deployments, you can have a reference to something that was created previously using this tool, and now you're referencing, sort of dynamically or by reference an ID or some output from that other thing. I wonder if it's possible, or if it's on the roadmap, to get some functionality along those lines in a stateless tool such as Bicep.
Is that what you're referencing in Terraform? Is that the data keyword?
Data or in remote state.
Okay, so ARM and Bicep are stateless in the sense that you don't have to keep track of a state file, but it's not really stateless. We just use Azure. So it's a very, very expensive state file management system. And so we just pull from that. We always pull the latest state from Azure, which means if people made changes out of band or through another deployment or what have you, our what if tool for predicting template deployments will know about it. We can reference resources that were created externally. So I think we can do already what you are looking for, but I may have misunderstood your point there.
Well, I can, Alex, there's a couple things. One is, yeah, I think you can. I mean, this is going to expose maybe gaps in my knowledge of ARM templates, but you can reference external resources from inside a template, right? I think. So you do have the ability to say, like, if some other template created, say, a VM, you can reference that resource by its resource name and then pull like its IP address based off of that. Now the state file is a little bit different because it's true that ARM templates don't keep track of the things that they deployed, right? And so like you can't actually say like, give me all the things that this other template deployed. But that is a known gap, and we're actually going to work, in the future, probably next semester, to close that with a feature that we're tentatively calling stacks. And then the third piece of this is, if you haven't checked out template specs are also a piece of this puzzle, which effectively allow you to upload a template into Azure and then reference that uploaded template from a different template. So it's like nested templates, but better, basically. So those three pieces together can give you some of what you want, but I agree that like the sort of the history file that represents the things that you've deployed is a gap in ARM, and that we know about, and we're gonna go close.
And our plan is to have template specs as a public preview middle of next month. So hopefully you can all access it, and you don't need to do the private preview sign up then. And I pasted a link to it as well.
Yeah, that template spec sounds like it might be pretty close to what I'm talking about. That's a very helpful and thorough answer. Thank you.
Shrikant? If you could come off mute.
Hi, Satya. Quick question. So does Bicep have support for all resource providers? I mean, the second part of my question is like when I was working with Friender and Terraform, like Terraform didn't have support for Friender, but ARM templates had. So how is it going to be with the Bicep? Any new resource providers? So there will be support from both ARM and the Bicep. So how are we going to handle this?
Yep, great question. So the rule is that if it works in an ARM template, it works in Bicep, because ultimately we're just translating down to an ARM template, and there's nothing that we need to do to onboard a new resource provider, and that was a really important kind of fundamental decision for us. And that's when we use the word transparent abstraction, that's kind of what we're referring to, that you still need to give us the resource type and the API version and all that sort of stuff. So it'll be day one support for any new resource type. On the Terraform question in particular of lagging, we don't want that to happen anymore as much as anybody does. So like Brendan said, we want all of the IAC tools for deploying to Azure to be as great as they can be. So there's a dedicated team at Microsoft to making sure that the lag for Terraform is as small as possible, and hopefully will just go away because it'll all be auto-generated at some point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Andre? If you could come off mute.
Yeah, hi guys. Yeah, sorry. So the question a little bit is, this question is a little bit from a different field, I would say. So there is an OAM spec that Microsoft kind of published last year. And in the OAM, they have pretty interesting notions of, or higher level abstractions, I would say, like an application or a component and stuff like that. So they don't have notions of Azure resources, but the higher level abstractions that allow people to kind of draw a line between development organization, so to speak, and operations organization, if there is some such a case. And there is a case in our organization. So do you plan to kind of add this kind of abstraction? So for example, in our case, we could, with OAM, and we kind of building some implementation of this kind of transformations from OAM inspired structures into ARM. So what happens is we can say, like, there is an application that consists of these set of components, and then each component gets transferred into its corresponding ARM counterpart, which means that developers no longer need to think about Azure in ARM terms, but they think about this in application terms. So
yeah.
Do you plan to have this kind of abstractions in?
The abstraction that we will have is modules. So I think I already added the link, but if not, I can put another link in there to the modules spec of how modules are going to work. Take a look at that and see. Give me a sense of what percentage of the scenarios are solved by modules. It's not exactly what OM is doing, but it does allow you to say, I want to deploy my app, and my app requires 2 parameters, like a name and a location. And then underlying of a module is a set of resources, and it could be whatever you want. So you can build some of those abstractions for your end users, and we do want to have kind of a central repository of modules that kind of have a Microsoft rubber stamp on them. That'll be a little bit further down the road, but we want to provide a really rich ecosystem of modules so people can share and learn from each other and build on top of each other. Does that answer your question, Andre?
Yeah, and another point to this is, like, in addition to all of these things, is what would be nice to have probably something that allows us to know which applications, like some intermediate state store, let's say, where we can say, like, these applications were deployed into this environment, for example, right? So, like, all of these things could, somehow could be registered somewhere. So we can say, like, what was deployed where and who did it, and all of these things.
Yeah.
I understand that.
Some... Go ahead.
No, sorry. I understand that this is outside of the scope of converting Bicep language constructs into ARMs, but on the other hand, from the operations perspective, it's a really good thing to have an option to see not Azure resources, but high level things like applications and environments. In some system.
Yeah, we can follow up offline on some of the stacks conversations as well to see if some of those scenarios will be met there. And then we are talking to the OM team to see conceptually what they've done and where they're headed and how we can bring some of those concepts closer into Azure. Nothing that I can really share because it's all pretty open right now, but definitely something that we are aware of and interested in pursuing.
Alex, let's just take one more question and then we should wrap. Mitch,
okay.
If you could ask a question. Mitch, if you
Hi,
come
everybody.
up.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. This looks all really great. Questions for you is there a way to diff a bicep file versus what's in Azure already? So in other words, you could figure out that this is what's different?
Yes, there is. So we have a new tool called What If that I'm grabbing a link for. It works for ARM templates. It'll work for Bicep by virtue of just generating the ARM template in advance. This is another one that we want to make easier so that you can just say, here's my Bicep file, what looks different. But in the meantime, you can always generate the ARM template. And we'll give you a diff based on what is in Azure. And again, no state file required. We just query what actually exists in Azure at this moment.
Okay. And before, I know you guys said that there was a way that you can decompile ARM into Bicep, but is there a way to generate the Bicep file directly from Azure without having to generate the ARM template first?
Yes, I think someone had asked that in the chat just now. Actually, we do want to. We have the export capability to export an ARM template. We will very likely add a tab or a toggle or something so that you can also export the Bicep file, and we'll use the decompiler for that.
So when you exported an ARM template today in the Azure portal, there are certain features that template generator can't do. So for example, if you have an app service and there's app settings, it says, hey, I can't do that. It tells you, and it gives you as much of a template as it can, but that's it. Will you guys suffer the same issues, or are you able to
same exact issues? We do. We're in parallel, kind of trying to always improve export. Ultimately, it's machine generated code, so it's never going to be perfect, but it shouldn't. It should be able to export without missing features. It should work, basically, even if it's not a clean template. So we will be kind of ongoing improving that, and then we'll make it easy to get the Bicep file. At the same time, everywhere where that Microsoft manages a repository of ARM templates, whether it's in the Quick Start templates or in Docs or what have you, we want to have a Bicep toggle in all of those places so that you can, if you see an ARM template, you should be able to get the Bicep file pretty easily.